So today, Ed Miliband says that nuclear energy is low-carbon energy that gives us guaranteed base load power. Who knew? Quite how you can be an advocate of that model whilst at the same time an advocate of intermittent energy, I don't quite know. He's going to commit the government to a further £14 billion for the Sizewell C plant. We'll debate in the next few minutes whether that's the right thing to do, whether it's the right model of a nuclear power station, and why our nuclear energy costs so much more than any other country in the world per kilowatt hour. We'll also debate how on the 29th of May the lights nearly went out. Did you know that? No, I bet you didn't. I'm joined in the studio by Clive Moffatt, former government advisor on energy, Sarano Jayawardena, who, of course, himself former minister, and Joe Phillips, former advisor to Paddy Ashdown. Let's get straight into this, Clive. On the 29th of May, I'm told that the National Grid had to make what are called 24,742 balancing actions to literally keep the lights on. It sounds very complicated.
Well, this is happening with some frequency, and it's to do with the fact that we have a system now where we don't have as much push button on supply flexible gas generation that we needed. We're often reliant upon interconnectors which don't provide when they need to provide. Which
means we import electricity from other countries, literally, from Norway, from Northern
Europe. This government's policy seems to be they want more of them, more interconnection, and less reliance upon domestic flexible generation. So there are a number of reasons why that is happening, and I think we're going to see more of it. The point is that we are, as we discussed before many times, is that we are heading for increased frequency and magnitude of blackouts, and we're involuntary blackouts.
It's going to happen, yeah?
Yeah, and we're looking at also locking in consumers to escalating costs. And today's announcement is simply worsens that position.
Explain.
Government have announced that this announcement today would increase security and reduce bills, right? Yep. On security, it won't do hardly anything. I mean, it barely makes up of a retirement loss of existing nuclear plant by the 2030s, even assuming Sizewell C gets built along with Hinkley gets completed. And the second point, it doesn't really make any difference and doesn't help the fact that we've, as a point I've raised before many times, that we have 35 gas plants, half of which are going to see the end of their economic life by the 2030s. And we're doing nothing to replace that, what I call flexible, affordable capacity, which contributes between 30 and 60% of power, especially depending on what the sun's shining and whether the wind's blowing.
Yeah.
So it's not going to do on bills. The big issue on bills is, as you said earlier, is that nuclear is very expensive.
So let's just drill into this.
And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that I remember the days when I was operating as a consultant when British Energy went bust. And at the time, in many ways, that was like the passing of the British nuclear industry. I remember talking to a lot of nuclear people in the industry who were saying, we'll lose ability, we lose technicians, we lose skill sets.
Because we were a world leader.
We lose manufacturing
at one point, we were a world leader in this, weren't we?
Yeah. And at that point, and then nothing happened. Until, of course, we sold it to EDF, and then we got locked into EDF's way of doing things, and EDF's technology. And interestingly enough, that technology is the only thing it's delivered at Hinkley is delays. It should have started in 2017. It will now possibly start in 2031. And overrun on costs, which was going to be 22 billion, is now going to be more like 50 billion.
But I mean, EDF are a French company. How is it that per unit, our nuclear energy is over double that of France's? How can this be?
I'm not an expert on civil engineering, particularly in the context of nuclear power, so I cannot be very precise about that. I can only surmise that we have lost manufacturing and supply chain resilience because of the reasons I described earlier.
Yeah.
And that we don't have skill sets and we're dependent on labour, which is not here, but has got to be brought in. skill sets and, if you like, manufacturing capability, and also the ability to manage this kind of project. You've got to remember how long ago it was when we built the last.
Is it just extraordinary? I mean, Joe, your party, Liberal Democrats, big advocates of solar and wind, and what Clive's saying is the whole thing's a mess.
Well, the whole thing's a mess, but that is successive governments kicking it into the long grass on the things that you've mentioned, Clive, which is about training people to do it. I mean, Nick Clegg famously said, well, if we go for nuclear, it's fine, but it's going to take 20 years before it's...
Yeah, we're almost there.
But,
Exactly.
But this is the problem, and it's the problem, I think, that is maybe not exclusively, but it is particular to British politics, is this appalling lack of long-term planning. I mean, previous government got rid of an awful lot of storage capabilities. The planning system, as we know, is absolutely hopeless. The delays, whether it's building a nuclear plant or a road or a railway or anything else.
We can't do anything, can we?
It's just ridiculous. And there is a huge argument. I mean, maybe you could say, Clive, if governments had taken the unpopular decision 20 years ago, 30 years ago, would we be in a better position now?
Well, we would, wouldn't we?
Well, yes, if they'd done something about British energy and as they sort of thought creatively about nuclear power at the time, but they didn't. And it was basically at the time when we had the dash for gas running concurrently with that. If you remember, we had Enron here, we had other American companies here, and we were building gas power stations. And the governments looked at that as a very cheap, secure way of moving forward on baseload power, especially given the demise of coal. And it almost happened concurrently with that.
Yeah.
So isn't Ed Miliband right to do something that, on the face of it, might look... So what do you do then?
My view about this is it's too late. I think none of the decision today won't do anything on security, it won't do anything on cost for consumers. I think you've got to remember that the media and politicians have been very quiet about the fact, OK, the government actually hasn't been using taxpayer money to fund the overruns, I think. But the real power, the real impact will come on consumers the day that they produce their first kilowatt hour. And that contract price, that CFD guaranteed contract price kicks in. And that was negotiated by Cameron and Davey at the time, which was a very, very generous general inflation index-linked contract price. And we're in a situation where that contract price is already significantly higher than the wholesale base price of electricity.
And negotiated by a Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer.
So by the time 2031 comes, EDF are already in the money, big time. And we're talking about a transfer from UK consumers to EDF over the lifetime of the asset of billions of pounds.
Ranald, this is shocking.
Well, I agree, clearly, and I actually agree with Joe. I don't often agree with Joe, but I agree
we can't
with Joe.
have that.
But we need more long-term decision-making in British politics. And, the fact that Nick Clegg was cock-a-hoop about the fact that he had delayed a decision on nuclear back then is part of the problem. Also, part of the problem is the planning system. It makes it so difficult to build anything. So I agree with Joe on that too. But I have to say, and it's not for me to defend Ed Miliband, he's still got to take the decision he's taken today because we need that power. Because as Clive said, we're going to lose the power coming from existing nuclear as those get retired. The fact that we're using old technology is poor, as a poor decision. I agree with that. EDF are looking at new types of plants in France. So why aren't we making that happen here?
Yeah.
And also smaller modular reactor. The one thing we've not talked about is that there is some commitment on that. And I think that is actually the really exciting thing.
That run was really interesting. So, we know that every nuclear submarine has a little mini nuclear reactor in the back of it. We know that the power stations that are being built at Hinkley and Sizewell are these massive sort of 50-year-old type power stations. Where is the world, Clive, on small modular nuclear reactors?
Spent a lot of time thinking about and doing some work on that years ago with Rolls-Royce. Went through a lot of numbers. The whole point is it's the wrong technology for the problem. The problem we're going to have with the massive investments already taking place in renewable energy is intermittency.
Yep.
What we're short of, and being desperately short of, is short-term, flexible, unabated gas generation. And for the reasons I explained, a lot of that plant's going to be out of its working life. We need it. And the point is, it's the most cost-effective.
So gas.
Yeah, cost-effective
Because you can turn
of
it on and turn
balancing
it
the
off.
system and providing flexible input. A whole array, theoretically, on paper might be appealing of small 400 to 500 meg, nuclear stations at closer to centres of population. But it's not going to solve the problem. The other problem with mini nuclear, smaller nuclear, is it's an unproven technology. The manufacturing base doesn't exist to create economies of scale to produce these nuclear modules at lowest cost. You've got an issue here of, I think, at the end of the day, of it has to be full on all the time, so it doesn't have demand sensitivity. So there's no flexibility built into this small modular nuclear reactor.
So logically,
it's going to require the same kind of support price.
Yeah, I mean, logically, if the SMRs were to work, and we were to go very much down the nuclear route, we wouldn't need wind, would we?
Well, I think there's a few things here. The first is, I agree with the point about intermittency. That's a different point, which I'll come back to in a second. The second point is, we do need more baseload energy, and SMRs can be part of that. And I mean, OK, look, I'm not the energy expert, but it's a proven technology in the context of nuclear submarines, so I'm pretty comfortable with the technology.
But Clive's argument is that if we've gone down the wind route to the extent we have, actually the backup is gas, because you can turn it on and turn it off.
But we need all of those things, don't we?
But, we've got such a shortage of baseload coming down the pipeline that we need to put more in. And if the planning process is so difficult...
It's not the most cost-effective way of developing baseload.
But if the procurement process is difficult, if the planning process is difficult for big nuclear, this might be part of the solution.
Well, I tell you what, let's end this section with one question to all of you. Should we go on building more wind farms in the North Sea?
Yes.
As a yes?
No. I don't think there's a need to do that now. We've got plenty already.
Clive?
No, I would put a moratorium on all wind production.
Why?
Because I think it's already extremely costly. I think already we're seeing that net zero costs in total are accounting for between 15 and 20% of energy bills. It's already going to increase escalating, because I think new investment in the next round for offshore will probably require a much higher CFD price.
Yeah.
On top of the CFD price I've just been discussing relating to this nuclear idea.
Yeah.
So I think the whole thing is geared up is wrongly. I think we should take time to reset and think seriously about what's going to be required to provide affordable, secure energy for the economy in the next 10 to 20 years. And we have to rethink the idea that perhaps we might need to have some CCGT and OCGT plants, more of them in place, because we will not survive, I don't think, with the current situation energy mix.
Clive Moffatt, former government advisor on energy, telling us that unless things change pretty rapidly, this country will experience blackouts. Now, we did have them back in the 1970s, for those of us of a certain age, and it seemed rather fun then, but it won't seem fun now, because we're more reliant on energy for everything in the modern world than we've ever been.